Welcome to Lantern Voices, a podcast by Lantern Publishing and Media. Welcome to Lantern Voices, a new podcast by Lantern Publishing and Media. Here, we talk about animal rights, veganism, climate activism, and so much more. I am Louisa, and I'll be your host for this episode. If you found this podcast and have no idea what Lantern is all about, please allow me to present ourselves to you. We are a non-for-profit publisher devoted to the publication of books on veganism and books that share important information about our planet and all animals that live in it, not just humans. If that sounds interesting to you, that's great. Come on in, get comfy, get your tea, your coffee, and let's get started. So today we're going to talk about veganic growing. For those of you who haven't heard of this term before, I will quote Jimmy Videle's The Veganic Grower Handbook. The word veganic is a combination of the words vegan and organic. In his book, Jimmy shares useful information about growing your own veganic food, as well as a guide about the most common cultivated species. It even includes space for you to add your own notes. And to talk about this topic, of course, we could invite no one other than Jimmy Videle himself. Welcome, Jimmy.
Hey, thank you, Lisa, for having me. I very much appreciate being here and you putting this all together.
Thank you very much for being here with us. I'm going to give you a little bit of your CV so people who haven't heard about you before know who you are. Feel free to interrupt me or add any information if you'd like, okay?
Excellent.
Jimmy Videle is a farmer, activist, consultant, and researcher. Besides being a published author, he has worked with AUM Films, the producers of movies such as Cowspiracy and What the Hell. And he also worked with the Humane Party USA, an animal protection party in Canada. He currently lives in Quebec. Is that correct?
That is correct.
With his wife and 5 rescue cats. 5 cats? Are them all there? Any increases in the family?
Actually, now, unfortunately, there's 4. We did lose one last year, but yes, there are 4, and they keep us quite busy.
I can imagine. There's never enough cats.
Well, there's never enough cats.
You have your own veganic crops back home, right?
Yes, we cultivate our own food. Exactly.
Mhm.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sorry if I use like a term that it's not very conventional. Not only I'm not very familiar with farming, I learned a lot from reading your book, but that was pretty much it. But also, English is my second language. I'm Brazilian. So if there is anything that I say that sounds a little weird, just ask me and we're going to go from there.
No, it's perfect. If you want to throw some Portuguese in there, maybe I won't understand, but it would make it interesting.
My first question to you is if you could tell our listeners a little bit of your journey with veganic food. You talk about it in the book in the book's introduction, so you probably talked about this a lot. But for those who haven't heard the book yet or considering it, how did you start? Where were your main challenges until you got the hang of it, and how's it going now?
Okay, so I can even throw something in there that probably isn't in the book. So I think for as long as I can remember, I've been a foodie. I've been somebody who really enjoys food. I grew up half Italian, half German on both sides of the family. There was always food everywhere. I was not raised vegan, like probably a lot of our listeners. But I very much enjoyed the whole idea of food. And so one of my first avenues, my first careers or my first lives, if you will, was I worked in restaurants. And the one thing I noticed when I was working in restaurants, especially when I got into a little bit more fancy restaurants, is that the vegetables were always so fresh. And and every time I would go to the grocery store, I go, wait a minute, I didn't see mushrooms that looked like that. I didn't see tomatoes that looked like that good as they were in the restaurant. That was when I was living in New Orleans. So when I left New Orleans, I started on a kind of a 3.5-month road trip in a Volkswagen bus, trying to find a new place to live. I was 23 at the time. This was in 1997. I was looking for a place to camp, and I ended up on this kind of dirt road and I was looking for a place to camp on the Gulf of Mexico. And as I was traveling down this dirt road, I I saw a bunch of pens with cows in, and all the cows were staring at me on the bus, and they were up to their elbows and their knees in their own manure. And there were 4 interlocking ones here in South Texas. And just at the end of all of those interlocking fences there was a windowless building with smoke billowing out of the top, and it was a slaughterhouse. And I had no idea. So what I was seeing for the first time in my life was a concentrated animal feeding operation and slaughterhouse. As disturbing as that, as I was driving down the dirt track to go to the Gulf of Mexico, there was a whole slurry of kind of water that was mixed with the manure. And as I got to the beach, the water was pouring right into the Gulf of Mexico.
From the slaughterhouse.
And from the cattle pens. Everything was going right into the Gulf of Mexico. When I saw that, I wasn't at that point, even understanding. I knew what vegetarian was. I probably had met a vegan maybe at that point in my life, but probably not, or not that I remember anyone. But I became instantly vegetarian. It clicked, like it was like, whoa, I can't do that. I can't eat animals. So that was my path for a little while. And I started my first farm in Arizona. It was a farm that raised animals for their milk and for their eggs, as well as a lot of vegetables, and that's the segue of coming back to working in the restaurant. When I noticed it, I couldn't find any good vegetables at the grocery store. In Arizona, it was really bad. Like I couldn't find anything good in season. It was terrible. I couldn't find it. So I said, well, if I can't find it, I'm going to grow it. I have no idea how to grow it. My grandfather was a farmer. His grandparents were farmers. My dad worked in an office. My mom worked in an office. So it skipped a generation. I had no idea, but I said, you know what? It's time to figure this out. And so I started growing my own food, and I became a farmer. But like I said, I was raising animals also, and there were some things that were very disturbing to me about that I didn't connect with. And I think this is very interesting. As a vegetarian, I didn't connect with it as I do now as a vegan. And one of them is that when you have animals that produce milk for human consumption, you must have the mama animals bred, and then they have babies. Okay. But where do the babies go? What do you do with all the babies? And in this case, it was goats. Well, the babies didn't have any place to go, especially the male goats. We didn't know what to do with them. So they were either sold from the farm to people that were butchering them at 8 weeks, which is very sad, or we had to take them to an auction, which is just this desolate place not far away where there's wind blowing. It's just terrible for the baby goats. I can't imagine how scary it was for them. But I didn't put that together as a vegetarian. I said, well, it's just what you do, right? Because you drink milk, this is what you do. I also didn't really realize what you do with the chickens once they're done laying their eggs. What is it that you do with that? Well, what I did with them is that I kind of put them in a mobile chicken cart that went rounded around the fields. My intention was to keep them alive for as long as possible, whether they laid or not. That was my ethic of the time. But what was happening is that great horned owls that lived on the property would come into the chicken pens, and they ate all of the chicken. And because my ethic was different then, I said, oh, well, I'm just giving a peace offering to Mother Nature. It's not exactly a great way of looking at how we raise food for human consumption, but I didn't make the connection. Anyway, so that was my path. That's where I came from. I started as someone who knew both farming from raising of animals and also raising of food. Well, it was in 2013 when I was finally I found myself in Montreal, Quebec. I was working on a farm that was just raising vegetables. And I got an email from a really good friend of mine, an old college roommate. His name was Kip Anderson, and he is the co-director of both Cowspiracy and What the Health. And at the time, he was putting the finishing touches on their film, Cowspiracy. And he writes me this email and he said, hey, so what do you think about veganic food? Veganic growing of food, of vegetables. I said, oh, Kip, that sounds fantastic, but there is no way possible that you cannot grow without manure. This was my stance. And he wrote me back and said, no, look at this website. There's a vegan organic network. There's these people in the UK that are doing it. Even in Quebec, there's a veganic agriculture network that also is telling people how to grow veganically. You can do it. You can change. Well, at that time, I wasn't even vegan. I was like, well, okay, let me start looking. And I started looking at all of the information. I read all the information. I said, wait a minute. That's possible. Why have I been coerced for so long in believing that we needed to use manure and we need to use blood meal and bone meal and all of these slaughterhouse byproducts? Like, why am I convinced? Why are we taught this? In all of the agricultural books, all say that this is what you need to use. The agronomists that when they teach in schools how to grow vegetables, they say you need a certain amount of tons of manure in your fields. If you're growing organically, you need a certain amount of blood meal or bone meal in your seeding mix for your plants to thrive. Well, when I started reading this information, because I'd been doing it long enough, growing my own food long enough, I was like, wait a minute. No, I can see this. I can see how we can switch manure to using plant-based compost. I can see how instead of using blood meal and bone meal, we can use soy meal or alfalfa meal or cottonseed meal or some other kind of plant material. And I can also see how we can have an entire field, entire gardening, entire backyard where we don't even spray organically improved insecticides, fungicides, herbicides. We don't need to. Because as important as it is to grow food for humans, it is also important to create our spaces so that the beings that have already lived there, no matter how small, whether it's an ant or a bumblebee or a fly or some sort of really small sparrow, they have the right to live there also. And when we start spraying, when we start damaging their environment in a way where it becomes toxic, where we poison the plants around them, well, then we can't. They cannot thrive in it. Right. So after that, when I became vegan and I saw the films, I watched Earthlings and I watched Cowspiracy and I helped promote it, I realized I was going to have the opportunity to start a second farm, to start a second place where I could grow my own food again. And I said, it is for sure. I'm going to do it veganically. And if it doesn't work, well, I'm just going to quit and do something else because there is no way from that moment forward in 2014, over 10 years ago, that I will exploit animals anymore. I just cannot do it. Mm-hmm. Challenges? Yeah, farming is full of challenges. Growing your own food is full of challenges. It changes all the time. And climate change makes it so difficult.
The world keeps changing all the time. And especially when you're talking about farming, you can't control the rain. You can't control the weather. You can't. And before you could kind of predict, but now it's even harder to do that. So I can only imagine the challenges only in that level already.
Yeah, and what we're noticing as growers, wherever we live, is that everything is shifting now. So we live at the 45th parallel. So we're really north. Okay, we're not North Canada like in Nunavut or at the North Pole or anything, but we're north. But what has happened is now our temperatures are reacting more like they are about 400 miles south of here. So even though that we're in Quebec, we're experiencing temperatures that people would be experiencing, say, in the Hudson River Valley. So all of the insects and all of the disease pressures and the insect pressures that the people in the Hudson River Valley would experience, we're now experiencing. There's insects that show up because a lot of insects, they can't survive our winters. So those that die, a lot of them migrate back and forth as butterflies, like specifically the cabbage moth is a great example. It's a moth that then migrates in here. Well, that one we've always had, but another one is called a squash vine borer, and the squash vine borer has never really been up here before until this year for the first time. And it's because our temperatures are so much warmer than they were before.
I lived in cities my whole life. I had an experience back home in Brazil when I grew up in a school that was in the middle of Mata Atlântica, which is like the natural forest that we have there. So I did have that contact, but in the end, I would like, okay, I'm done with school. I'll take the school, but I'll go back to the big city where I lived. So I didn't have much contact with farming, much contact with that reality that people in the countryside in Brazil would have. So I hear because of that environment, because now I'm living in New York City, like what I get from people, it's like, oh, but we still have snow or it's still cold or things like that. They don't grasp the reality because of maybe the whole artificial environment that we are when we're in the big city. But when we talk to people like you and with people who are constantly working with the land and producing food, which is something that everybody needs to live, then the signs are all there. There's no way you can ignore it.
Yeah, that's right. It's it's pretty remarkable. I will always find it unfortunate that there is that sense of climate denying in the world, just because everywhere it's changing. Every country around the world has experienced things they have never experienced before. And I understand that there is this sort of propaganda machine where the green left is trying to, there's this idea that the green left is trying to profit from maybe electrifying the fleet, right? Electrifying cars or putting more solar or putting more wind. And I'm probably pretty sure that people are trying to profit on this, but it is 100% certain that if you take all of that propaganda out, whether it's real, whether it's not, I'm not even going to talk about that. But what I do know is real is that humans are anthropogenically changing the climate on Earth based on two factors. One, we're putting too many fossil fuels into the atmosphere. And two, we're changing way too much land. And the majority of land use change in the world today is from animal agriculture and the crops raised to feed those animals. Okay, and actually what's really interesting about that is that we could theoretically, in theory, continue to put as many fossil fuels into the atmosphere as we want. But if we were to not have any land use change, if we were to allow all the trees to grow, all the lands to rewild, stop raising animals and using all that land for that, we can use like 1/10 of the land or 15th of the land just to grow the vegetables that we need for the whole world. For those that can, to go all vegan and to just raise those plants, well, then it's possible. Don't get me wrong, we still need to stop putting fossil fuels into the atmosphere. But all I'm saying is I think that really land use change was actually the bigger problem. And it's not from development, and it's not from roads, it's not from infrastructure. It's actually from agriculture. This is from my people. This is what we're doing to the land, right? But there is a better way, and this is what the Veganic Growers Handbook is all about. It's not just about farming change. Actually, it's very little about farming change. It's more about empowering people, no matter where you live, no matter what size of plot that you have, to grow your own food, because it's really the biggest power that you have. And it's one of the oldest knowledge that we have. We learned how to gather, and very soon after we learned how to gather, we realized there were certain plants that produce food. And if we were to sort of kind of cultivate them in a way where we maybe weeded out the ones that we couldn't eat, but let the other ones thrive, there used to be these like perennial sorghums and perennial wheats and perennial rye that people realized, and all First Nation people way back, they used to make all their flatbreads, right, by grinding either nuts or grains on stone, right? This is what people lived off of. This is what they would carry with them when they went from place to place, are these kind of flatbreads, these hardened flatbreads that they would make from all of these grains that they found wild. Well, they would learn that in a certain place, all they would have to do is just kind of weed around them, let those thrive, and guess what? Then the entire tribe, the entire community who is living with them would have accessible food source. I find this fascinating.
It really is. I feel like we can talk on and on and on about it. If you're a human being living in the 21st century, chances are that you check your email every day. Also, chances are that your inbox is constantly pretty full. We know how important it is to keep up to date with things that matter. This is why our newsletter is so amazing. We only send one newsletter a month, and within it, you'll find all our latest news and, sometimes, access to exclusive content. Recently, we went through all our contacts and did a huge cleanup, trying our best to make sure that no one is in the list multiple times and no one's going to keep getting tons of emails. We want to keep you informed without overwhelming you with 1,000 messages. We know you don't have time to waste with 100 new emails. Give your time to what really matters. Go to lanternpm.org and sign up for our newsletter today. One of the things you said now is how some people say, oh, they are profiting out of sustainable energy. I think that's a very funny argument to have in the reality and the economy that we live, because oh yeah, the fossil fuel industry is doing it out of the kindness of their heart. They're not profiting out of it. So everybody is profiting. Why not profit out of something that can actually make the world livable for the next generation and for our generation? And I mean, next question that I had would be more like what the impact of the veganic growing can have in the planet and in people's health. I feel like you touched about this when we were talking now about the way that the climate and the actions of humans are impacting. So when we talk about veganic growing in specifically, would you say that that has a healthier impact in the world? Would you say that that has a healthier impact for people, for animals? How does veganic growing ties with all that we were just talking about?
Yeah, it's a really excellent question. And that's really the sort of the key to what we talk about when we discuss veganic growing, when we're getting together, when we're doing conferences, whatever, is how does veganic growing impact? How does it benefit the world around us? And the great part about it is that veganics can be extremely productive. Now, just like everything else, it requires a lot of skill. But even if you're starting, you can see that one tomato plant will produce you maybe 20 or 40 tomatoes. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. This is a lot of food. That is a lot of tomatoes from one plant. Now, how does veganics benefit the planet? Well, what I co-founded was an organization called certifiedveganic.org, or the North American Veganic Certification Standard. And really what this is it was a certification to be independent of the organic certification, because what I found with organic certification, or organic food growing, as you will, is that organic food growing still allows, and I did touch on this before, all sorts of organically approved insecticides and fungicides. And now in Canada, they actually even allow herbicides, which in the United States they don't, which is a whole other story. So they're allowing these things in because farmers are saying, well, I can't grow without help. I need spray. Okay. Well, in veganics, we don't allow them. We are our standard. We don't allow this kind of thing because what we feel ultimately is that, one, working with nature to produce food for ourselves, but by also producing food for nature. So in the idea of, no, we don't want all the squirrels come in and eat all of our tomatoes, but the ones that drop, they're more than welcome to. The seed heads, the some of the plants that can go to seed that we would eat, say lettuce or arugula or coriander, cilantro, right? Or dill. They put up these seed heads that at the end of the year, when birds are migrating through, they will then take those seeds and will give them the fuel, the energy, the proteins that they need to be able to continue their flight. So these are the kinds of things we think about in veganics. We don't just think about, okay, how much square feet do we have? How much human food can we grow? Can we continue to till it under, replant on it again, do it again, do it again, do it until there's, we've just exhausted all of the sort of soil life, or the healthy soil in our growing spaces. No, we're going to let some plants decide to do what a plant wishes to do. And a plant wishes to go to flower, to seed, and then reproduce itself. This is what plants want, right? This is what they exist for themselves. But it probably even goes further than that. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. That's not how metaphysically you want to get with it, but I am certain that plants communicate with each other, and we actually have this understanding now that they can communicate through the network of fungal and through their root exudates and through the root systems, kind of like the nervous system in the human being or in all animal beings. And then I'm also positive that if we were able to understand, the plants send out pheromones when they're being, say, attacked by a certain insect that invites other insects or other birds in to help counterattack, if you want, but counteract that sort of predation that's happening to them. So they're sending out these signals and these messages all the time. So this is what we allow to have happen. We are trying to create gardening systems, growing systems that incorporate nature, but allow nature to be as she wishes to be.
I think we put ourselves as humans in a very high pedestal as like without us, nature wouldn't survive when it's kind of the opposite.
Yeah, it's pretty much the opposite. It's pretty much the opposite.
One of the things that I've been listening a lot about, I work with marketing and social media at Lantern, so I'm constantly looking for content producers, especially young activists that post a lot on TikTok, on Instagram. And one of the things that I noticed that people talk most about is time. Because before it was like, oh, this is too expensive. Life is expensive. So we got to that point that life is expensive. So we all know that whenever we're going to do a change in our life or something like that, we were going to have to think how that's going to fit in our budget. But something that it's becoming a bigger discussion, it's time. So you mentioned in your journey that you decided to dedicate your time to organic and then veganic growing. I wonder, like, if is it even possible to get started in that journey when you have to work 9 to 5, when you cannot like live around nature and have this dedication to nature?
I come from the before social media movement, from this before social media generation. I think that's what they should call us, Generation Xers. They should call us, we are the before social media. We're just catching up to the millennials. We're just catching up to everyone else. But I guess for me, it was just something that was always a part of me. Like my first passion was always nature first. So when I actually had a corporate life, I actually in between the restaurant and the farm in the restaurant working in New Orleans, Louisiana, and the farm in Arizona, I actually worked a corporate life. Actually, it was probably more like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m, almost 6 days a week, running some 2 rental car branches in the small town of Arizona where I was living. So I wore a white shirt and tie. I worked there for 9 years. But all the while, there was sort of that sort of passion inside me that, wait a minute, this isn't fulfilling me at all. Sure, I was making a paycheck. Sure, I actually did enjoy the work. But every weekend, I was out in nature. At that point, I was a passionate citizen scientist. Now we call it I'll think of the word in a minute. There's a more political correct version of that.
Mhm.
But basically, I was a volunteer scientist who was going out documenting what I saw, who I saw out in nature, birds, animals. I wasn't so great on plants, but trees and forests and ecology and things like this. And this was my passion project. Well, when I realized that I just couldn't do this sort of stressful 9 to 5 work anymore, I decided, I got to find something else. Now, what is it that how can I be as close to nature as possible? What job would give me that? Now, I didn't have the background or the schooling to become sort of a research biologist. I didn't go to school for that. So that was going to take years and years and years. So you know what? What about farming? What about growing food? What about doing that and then doing it for people? So not just growing food, but then I'm going to grow food in the best possible way to feed people's families and to feed people's children, right? So that's how I came there. Now, how do other people? And when I started the farm, I was still working that 6 to 6 days a week. And the 7th day on Sunday, or maybe Saturday was more like a half day, I was home at 2. I was in the fields all day preparing the farm, working as much as possible. I would work when I got home because there was that sort of drive that this was something that I wanted to do. This was that idea. But I think now, as I come around to it, because this question comes up a lot, like how do people do it in the cities? I think the best way is to come up with some sort of cooperative model. There are things like community gardens. There's even cooperative community planting projects that happen. And I think getting involved and getting experience, and there are in pretty much every city in the United States and Canada, there's at least community gardens, and there's probably a community garden project. I know that there are garden projects in schools, there are garden projects with food banks. So it's about diverting time. Somebody asked me, how did I find time to write the book? How did I find time to write Veganic Growers Handbook? When I was on social media, I was doing YouTube shows once every 2 weeks. Like, how do you find the time to do? Well, you decide that these are the things that are super important. That you give priority. You're right. Every day we're like looking for those 5, 10, 15 minutes. Where can we do this? Where can we do that? And I still do it now, and I'm in the process of I always continue to write, and I have a second book that I'm writing, and I'm constantly trying to input the time between the correspondences I do, between the farming that we're doing, between the 4 rescue cats, between the families. Like, will you make the time? Because it's important, not even for you, but on a grander scale. The Veganic Growers Handbook is really, it's not about me. It's about showing everyone else what's possible. It's the only book written that is like that. You can go into any other growing book or gardening book, and they're always talking about the exploitation of animals that is needed. The Veganic Growers Handbook was specifically designed so that anyone who's an activist, anyone who's a gardener, anyone who's curious about not exploiting animals, about being anti-speciesist in their growing practices, can pick up this book and go, wow, okay, I can completely relate. Like, I don't have to read through it and like flip a couple of chapters and go, I don't want to listen to that. I don't want to talk about that. So I think that the best thing that I the best advice I can offer is that I need to also compartmentalize my time. Mm-hmm. But when it's time to do something that's really important, that I know is for the greater good, for the higher good, for something that goes way beyond myself, and the Veganic Growers Handbook does that, and other things that I'm working on do that, and other things that so many other activist people are working on are doing that. Well, those are the times. Even if it doesn't pay as much, that's not what the point is. The point is to live a life that's fulfilling. Because I can tell you right now that as a farmer and as working my 6 to 6 job, I make a third of what I used to make. But I can tell you I am 100 times happier. And to me, that is very important. And I'm able to express that more. There was actually a time when I was working that corporate job where I forgot how to smile for real.
No.
How to laugh. Like, I had to look at myself in the mirror. I was doing so much service to customer service that it was all like, okay, how can I better serve you? But I couldn't break the smile. I couldn't even make the smile happen without forcing it. When I became a farmer, that almost instantly changed. And when I did something that was more engulfing and more important to my soul, and knowing that it was benefiting so many other things more than me, it just radiates. Now it just radiates out. So I can't tell every individual person how to live their lives. Every one of us is going to have challenges. Of course, there are time constraints. All of us have it. If you have children, even more so. They take up so much precious part of your time as you're raising them and nurturing them. But all I can say is, if it's important, if you feel it goes beyond ourselves, well, you'll find the time. We just have to sit back, meditate on it, and we'll see that the time is there.
Yes. I mean, I'm taking advantage of this podcast because I have questions that I want to talk to people about, like things that would apply to my life. And this is one of them. So I love that you mentioned community gardens because I live between two. Actually, one of them is constantly closed. I did run into the director the other day and she was like, well, it's closed because we need volunteers. Do you volunteer? And I was like, okay, let me find time and I'll be back. Time again.
Time.
But yeah, I could. I was in school back then. Now I'm not anymore. I graduated. So I actually have the time to go over there and help out. So they do have those projects and they're super nearby my house and I keep postponing. Perhaps if I wasn't scrolling on social so much in my downtime, maybe I could go there. It's what you said is about, I think, wanting it and then doing the job of like, okay, so I'm going to have to change this and that aspect of what I currently do on default and dedicate that time. Lantern Publishing and Media is devoted to sharing messages of compassion. Our books inspire a better world by telling the stories of animal rights activists, climate activists, and their fights for a world where everyone can live in harmony, no matter their species. Lantern is a 501c non-for-profit organization. Your donation helps us keep our work going. If you can, go to lanternpm.org/donate to help us with any amount. Once again, the website is lanternpm.org/donate. Your generous gift enables you to support our collective mission to inform, inspire, and educate. Thank you very much. And since we were talking about like urban environments and we're talking about like younger generation and things like that, another personal question that I have is I love plants. I love cultivating things. And when I was reading your book, I like circle a few of my favorites, especially like chamomile, that I love it and I would love to have it here. But unfortunately, the green thumb stayed with my grandma generation. My grandparents great at it, me not so much. So I was reading the book and I was starting to think, no, I think I can handle it with like following the steps. Would you recommend starting from any particular point in the book for somebody who kills more plants than they are proud to admit?
Yeah, I think the best. I was actually thinking about this. I think about this a lot because urban gardening or balcony gardening even is not my strong suit. But because I get a lot of questions about, well, what do I do in the city? What do I do in the city? Well, I think about it all the time, and I think the best part in the Veganic Grower's Handbook, there is an entire section on starting your own seeds and how to make your own soils, right? And I specifically wrote it so that anywhere that there is kind of a nursery, a Home Depot, and even in the city, there's got to be like a hardware store that sells materials for gardening. And there's probably even nurseries in the middle of the city or right on the outskirts of the city. I'm sure of it. And in most cities there are. But you can find all the materials that you need to create basically a potting soil. A potting soil is basically a very fertile soil that you could grow any plant from start to finish. So some you can seed, like say climbing beans or bush beans or lettuces or arugula, and some like that you transplant, like tomatoes, or what you're saying. Sometimes it's better to buy a transplant of chamomile. Now, those same nurseries, even though they're not veganic, they do grow a lot of plant starts for you, right? So you can go down to your nursery, you can take the Veganic Growers Handbook, you can take that soil list and go, okay, I need peat moss. Or even better, I need a potting mix that doesn't have any animal products in it, which you can find. You can absolutely find it. There's at least on our website, certifiedveganic.org, I actually have a list of all the potting soils. You can also buy bulk compost, but all the potting soils that you can find pretty much at every Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace Hardware, those kinds of places, and all of the even smaller nurseries, you can find a potting mix that doesn't have any animal components in it, any slaughterhouse byproducts in it, or any manures in it, right? So you start with that. And then you add to it, it's like we talked about before, maybe alfalfa meal or cottonseed meal or soybean meal or neem seed meal. And if you can't find those, you can find them online because everything's very easy to order these days if you need. So if you are in a balcony or you are in a small space where you at least have some sun exposure, I mean, that's really a big key. You need to have some sun or at least some heat. If you don't have sun, hopefully it's warm. And in the middle of the city, I imagine in the summertime, it is warm. So it probably doesn't have a problem at all.
It is. I live in a pre-war building. We have those pieces of metal in the middle of the apartment that just gets warm in the winter and you cannot control it. So yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow. Oh, you can almost grow your tomatoes in the winter, just right up next to that metal. That's all you need.
Oh, that's nice. Good idea. I might try that.
Put your kale right next to it. It should be fine. But basically, what you would need then is that potting mix recipe, and a 5-gallon bucket, and that's really all you need. And you put that in, and the 5-gallon bucket, because you want to have the soil deep enough so that when you grow any of your plants, they have a root system that's deep enough. After that, you need to figure out a way to organize your own place. You probably drill some holes in it, poke some holes in it with some nails so the water can drain a little bit. Put it in something so the water doesn't drop on your bottom neighbor's head, or on their dog, poor doggy. Go ahead and start planting. The Veganic Agriculture Network, two friends of mine, Megan Kelly and Stefan Grollo, they have a great website called goveganic.net. And Stefan is an expert on balcony growing veganically. Even goes so far as to grow or to make his own compost on the balcony and then use that compost and feed his plants that way. And he's got beautiful, I mean, he's got tomatoes. And I see this in Montreal every time I go, which is really not that far from New York City and gets almost as hot. There are these balconies that are just layered with tomato plants and bean plants, and they got kale growing underneath. So again, it's a matter of just try, knowing that you're going to be probably a little unsuccessful the first year or so. But when you have that first success, you're going to say, oh, wow, I can do this. And then you taste your tomato and you go, whoa, wait a minute. I haven't tasted a tomato like this in a really long time.
I like that you said 1 year. That makes me feel a little bit better because I think I was expecting, okay, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. I'm still not, no, okay, 1 year. 1 year is, it's okay. 1 year is doable. I think I can do that. I will try and I'll let you know the results.
Awesome. Definitely try. Definitely try.
We know the vegan activist community is out there, and we want to connect with each and every one of you. We are proud supporters of initiatives that fight for a more compassionate world for all animals, humans and non-humans alike. For more content on vegan activism, follow Lantern on social media. We are Lantern Publishing and Media on Facebook, at Lantern PM on Instagram, and at Lantern PM Official on TikTok. Going back when we were talking about veganic generally, and not just in urban environments now, but everything, I think, what would you say that it's the biggest challenge for veganic growers in general today? Is it access to information? Is it climate change? Is it not being taken seriously by some people? Is it, what is there?
Here's the most interesting one. So yeah, climate change is going to happen no matter whether you're veganic or conventional organic. Access to information now, there's just a ton. I mean, there are just a lot of wonderful people out there speaking about it. There are books about it. There are YouTube videos about it. There's podcasts about it. So the information is there. Really can't say now that it's not. Plus, there's our website, but there are other websites as well, like Go Veganic. There's Growing Green, which is another website. But I think the most interesting one is the stigma behind the word vegan. You would think that in 2024, it would be more embrace the word vegan, that, pretty much I would say probably every family now, extended family, they probably have a vegan in the family, or they know of a vegan in the family, or somebody's dating a vegan, right? So in the family unit, I would guess. But what I noticed here in Quebec, which I thought was the most interesting, is that when people started understanding the word veganic, because we were pretty poignant about putting the word veganic on all of our signs when we're selling our vegetables, right? They would see that, and then they would realize veganic meant vegan, and they would walk away. I actually lost business because I started being more of a vocal activist about what veganic was. Not trying to change anybody into their belief system, but just telling people the difference between what veganic culture was versus organic culture. And I lost customers. So for me, that was the biggest thing. So what I'd come up to is that I'm never going to stop. I'm never going to stop using the word veganic. I think it's the best word. It's so much more appropriate than plant-based growing, in my opinion. You can say plant-based growing, but people don't correlate what that means. They think, oh, you grow plants. They don't realize you grow plants with plants. They just know that, oh yeah, plant-based. Oh yeah, I believe in growing plants. But when you say vegan, they go, oh, okay, now there's an ethic that goes along with it. There's a reason why that word is being used. So for me, by using that word and not stopping to use a word, I think what really needs to happen is we just need to have more people out there doing it, more people deciding to do it. especially vegan people. And I did really write the Veganic Growers Handbook for every activist out there. So if you're an activist and you haven't read it, this will give you all the information you need to know. And all those questions say, whoa, you can't grow without using animals. Well, yeah, you can. And here's all the reasons why. And here's all the information on how you can. It's all in this book. I mean, it really is, as much as it is growers manual, as an activist manual to answer all those questions. Because I also had to answer all those questions when I started, right? So this is why it's there. But the more vegans that get together, and I really like this cooperative model, even in the countryside as well as the city, of having people come together to grow food all together. And what you will notice is that once you get a little bit of experience, you're going to grow a lot and really pretty quick. And once you do, you're going to go, what are we going to do with all this abundance? Well, then we can start doing something super interesting. We can start giving it to soup kitchens. We can start giving it to the homeless. We can start figuring out a way to make sure that everyone has access to veganic produce independent of income level. Right? I mean, we know that food deserts are a huge problem, and they are a big problem, and so much bigger problem in the minority communities of the United States and in Canada than they are in the upper class white neighborhoods. You know, we know that the food deserts exist, and this is where they are. Well, this is how we can change that. This is one of those ways that we can change that. I mean, we know in First Nation communities also, I mean, the access to fresh vegetables, if they're not growing to their own, is almost none. I mean, the grocery stores are pitiful in First Nation communities.
And it is so interesting because we are starting to see, I'm not sure how starting it is, but we are definitely seeing organic and by extension veganic food as more expensive and therefore less accessible.
And that's what's interesting about veganics, because of the fact that we don't use sprays, because of the fact that we use all of our own compost if we can. Like this is as a vegan. My food was actually cheaper than all of the organic farms around. Mm-hmm. I actually felt guilty charging what I did. And it's actually one of the reasons why there were certain crops I wouldn't decide to sell, because people were selling a bunch of carrots for $5, organic carrots. I said, okay, carrots are great, but the nutritional value of carrots was really not all that fantastic in comparison to other crops, and you're charging $5. I couldn't even charge more than $3.50. Now look at that. That's a 30% less. But all veganic growers could be the same. But then this becomes a more systemic issue. Now, this is where I also believe the governments need to get involved to help support young people to start farming, because we're going to run out of farmers. This is a big problem. We're going to run out of farmers in the next 10 to 15 years.
Wow.
Because all of the farmers are over 55, over 60, and young people have decided, their children or grandchildren have decided, I'm not going to do that. That work looks terrible. It's too hard. I don't make enough money. And it's true. So we need to look at it differently. Like in Canada, we have public health care, right? Publicly funded healthcare. And even in the United States, there's Obamacare. I think it's still called Obamacare. I am a U.S. citizen, but I don't have Obamacare. But anyway, so there is, and if you don't make enough money, there is Medicare or Medicaid. And if you're a senior, there's also Medicare, right? So there are these programs that already exist. All of our schools are publicly funded. All of our public schools are publicly funded. I went to a public school. I didn't go to private school, right? So why not look at farming, one of the most basic necessities in life? More important than schooling, to be honest. More important than school. More important than healthcare, because if you eat better, then guess what? You probably need less healthcare. But why don't we look at growing our own food and take it out of that sort of for-profit or capitalistic model? Why don't we look at it as, let's be cooperative in our growing? And I know that in socialized systems and in communist countries, this did not work at all. In Vietnam, it did not work. They grew way too much rice. In other countries, they don't have enough rice because of what happened. I get that. Like, I'm not talking about changing the sort of mentality of the United States or Canada. But what I am saying is there's got to be a way to take something so fundamental, so basic, in need in our lives, and turn it into a system that basically we all support. I mean, I would pay an extra $15 a month in my taxes to make sure that I always had access to fresh vegetables. Like, what if that? Imagine if every New York City, every resident paid $15 extra in their out of their paycheck a month. $15, not a lot. How much money is that? $150 billion a month to grow food. To figure out a way to raise food in the best possible way. So the money, it's there. And even and there's people out there a lot smarter than me that could figure all this out. It's just about changing the mindset. But we must take agriculture out of the for-profit system. We must take it out. Because I can tell you're going to see more, and we're actually seeing this happen in Quebec. A lot of people were turned on by this idea of being a small farmer, say about 10, 12, 13 years ago. 75% of those small farmers have stopped because it has gotten too expensive to do what they do, and you can't charge enough. And I don't think you should. What we need is to have more public support. And I think most people would support that.
It is in everybody's best interest to keep eating. It is.
In a possible way. But yeah, of course.
Jimmy, thank you very much for being here today. Thank you for participating in the podcast, sharing your knowledge with us. Is there anything that you want to say that maybe we missed, we didn't touch, or a message that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Really, the only thing I want to say is if you ever want to reach out or if you want to connect, I have a YouTube channel called Jimmy Videle Veganic Grower. I have over 30 question and answer videos and shows that I did from 2022 and 2023 that basically talks about everything that you could possibly want to know about growing. Now I'm starting to put more videos in there about a nature reserve that I'm trying to protect here that encompasses the farm. That's really interesting. So if you're into nature, you can be into that too. But there's still just a lot of information about growing. And if you're anybody who's interested about becoming a small grower, maybe wanting to sell or farm, check out our certifiedveganic.org website or North American Veganic Certification Standard, but it's certifiedveganic.org. And if you're an activist who's looking for information, we created, and I'm a co-founder, so it wasn't just me. And we had the standards vetted. We actually have what people have called the gold standard in growing food, which is the veganic standard, vetted by probably 10 of the best experts worldwide on veganics. So we are very lucky to, as the founders, to now have this resource that is available for all activists out there. So you can look at it and have all your questions answered.
Perfect. I can definitely add all those on the description as soon as I figure out how I can do that, but I know it is possible. So I'll leave the links and everything in the description. So if anybody listening would like to reach out or to know more, then they can go directly from there. Because I know sometimes when you're talking on podcasts, you're like, is it with a C? Is it with a K? So in the link description, it's best.
It's all clear. It's all clear.
Well, thank you again for being here today. And for all those of you listening, if you like to try veganic growing for yourself, go get a copy of the Veganic Grower's Handbook. As Jimmy said here, it's very thorough and very complete. You can find it anywhere you buy books, but if you prefer to buy it online, go to lanternpm.org. On the top right corner, you'll find a little search bar. You just type the book's name, the Veganic Grower's Handbook, and it will take you right to the book page. So you'll find all the options for the paperback version and for the ebook edition if you want to have it like right away on your e-reader. We'll leave you here for today, but stay tuned to our podcast feed and our social media to know more about upcoming episodes. Follow us at Lantern PM on Instagram, and we'll talk again soon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.